Tarek William Saab is General Attorney of Venezuela. He initially dismissed arrest of Alex Saab, who is not a relative of his, and Raul Gorrín as fake news. However, a few minutes later, he reassessed his comments and concluded that he had no further information on legal situation of Alex Saab and Raul Gorrín, in line with previous declarations from Jorge Rodríguez, President of National Assembly, who chose not to comment on this arrest despite having in the past long lobbied for his release from United States prison several years ago. Diosdado Cabello and Delcy Rodríguez continue evading mention to the matter, and they instead appeared jointly at a populist event in Ciudad Bolívar, showing unity between police and executive branch. Diosdado Cabello and Delcy Rodríguez have reasons to fear and simultaneously support Alex Saab and Raúl Gorrín's request, as complying with United States demand for extradition into the United States would entail a major insurance for saving their own political jobs. United States is interested in cooperating with Venezuela and expanding symbiosis between SEBIN, DGCIM, FBI, and CIA. Donald Trump continues considering Venezuela and the United States as a single country, as the world's greatest oil reserve and producing country. Indeed, Venezuela's petroleum industry makes more sense tied to the United States, as shipping time and cost to the United States is shorter and cheaper than to Asia. So Venezuelans have a history of a deep relationship with the United States. In the past, while anti-imperialism is becoming extremely complicated due to situation in Cuba. Miguel Díaz-Canel has conceded that he is willing to dialogue with the United States on any topic, removing anti-imperialism slogans, while grandnephew of Raúl Castro is dealing with CIA in Mexico in a similar fashion as Delcy Rodríguez or her entourage previously dealt with CIA in Caracas long before United States extraction of former President Maduro. Cuba might evolve into an economic agreement with the United States, which would entail serious economic and legal reforms within Cuba, similar to those that are already being applied in Venezuela, so that American investment gets preferential status. In return, United States would supply Cuba with 100,000 barrels of Venezuelan oil which would be paid for by the United States. This sounds quite generous because the United States prohibits Venezuela from sending oil to Cuba for free, and the United States is determined on conducting oil sale transactions due to military deployment near Venezuelan coast. And Mexico has also been forced to reduce or stop Mexican oil shipments to Cuba, as Mexico and Venezuela have a history of sending petroleum for free or on long-term debts which are never repaid. Cuba is used to receiving petroleum for free from anyone. That was also the case with Russia and the Soviet Union in the remote past. So would the United States supply Cuba with 100,000 barrels of oil daily for free in exchange of American investment and legal reforms? This sounds absolutely hilarious and unbelievable. However, in national security interests of the United States, that would enhance its relationship with Mexico and Venezuela as a reliable partner, really interested in Latin American unity or Western Hemisphere regional security in general, while Cuba would have no option but to comply with stiff daily assignments from the United States to Cuban government, taking the example of Delcy Rodríguez. It sounds like the United States tolerates communist and socialist propaganda as long as it is confined to rhetoric, while deep reforms are according to United States designs. That is proven true in Venezuela with the arrest of Alex Saab and Raul Gorrín, hydrocarbon law, and amnesty law. Same recipe should be applied to Cuba as well. Amnesty law was passed on first discussion at Venezuela's National Assembly. Officialist and opposition deputies, in a rare display of national unity, expressed words of how their opinions have converged. Venezuelan politicians have matured since January 3rd as we deal with adversity of realizing that our country for too long has been on the wrong economic path, and the National Assembly will turn its attention to civil society over the weekend, where the specifics of amnesty law will be proposed to civil society, universities, business associations, so that next week amnesty law may be finally approved on second discussion. Text of amnesty law has not been made available yet. It is confirmed that amnesty law will exclude persons who have recurrently asked for United States invasion into Venezuela, while most cases of release of political prisoners would be honored. Military and police prisoners are said to be token exchange assets for Diosdado Cabello, who is trying to the impossible to prevent their liberation. Civil society, understandably, is asking for further transparency in general, both in the cases of arrest of Alex Saab and Raul Gorrín, and on the actual words of the assembly law. It is likely that Venezuelans will know full contents of amnesty law once it is published at the Venezuelan official gazette. However, as all opposition candidates have voted in approval of amnesty law, and many officialist deputies have asserted that their previous maximalist pretensions have been erased in favor of a more tolerant and inclusive attitude, we shall expect that the text of amnesty law will be adequate despite minor disagreements, which always happen with any law. On the international front, Presidents Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva and Gustavo Petro of Colombia have conclusively rejected a return of Nicolás Maduro to Venezuelan presidency. Organization of American States Secretary General Albert Ramdin does not seem particularly fond of Nicolás Maduro either. Cuban government is about to be modified at United States discretion in the next few days, and Daniel Ortega of Nicaragua is expected to prudently disappear from public opinion radar during the next few months, as he effectively has no allies left. Caribbean islands, one by one, are being absorbed by United States and Trinidad and Tobago demands of regional security and military cooperation with United States. President Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva of Brazil commented that returning Maduro into Venezuela is absolutely not a priority, as Venezuela's priority is returning to democracy and increasing PDVSA's production to 3 million barrels a day. Lula da Silva has recently spoken with President of Venezuela, Delcy Rodríguez, so it seems that Lula is comfortable with her acting presidency, while Petro looks absolutely convinced and thrilled to work with Delcy Rodríguez, as he is already suggesting Ecopetrol's investments into petroleum fields in western Venezuela in order to achieve Great Colombia. It will be a challenge to confront hardliners of officialism who are used to always holding a grip of power, while Delcy Rodríguez and Diosdado Cabello, who have always been seen as less communist than Nicolás Maduro, should certainly take a chance, especially after political prisoners are released as a consequence of amnesty law to be approved on second discussion, that they might have to tilt to the center or to the right, where most of the Venezuelan population lies, in agreement with the rest of Latin America. Some people claim that President Lula is shifting to the far right after his encounters with Trump and Milei. It looks like socialists are embracing market values and productivity, as their own research shows that central planning has failed. Delcy Rodríguez's experiment with comunas is bold. Its chances of success are unknown because historically comunas have not worked, but she is emphasizing comunas with a very business-oriented, industrial, modern investment of economies of scale. Yesterday she set the example of black beans that should be produced wholly in Venezuela rather than being imported, and she is asking comunas around the country to identify which ones are suitable for black bean production according to terrain characteristics of regional or municipal soil. So a black bean organized strategy nationally would be implemented in Venezuela, very much like China has already done. It will be interesting to realize how ownership and legal rights for workers who develop those comunas will be. Westerners in general have no deep appreciation of how Chinese legal and economic systems work together. While Donald Trump has realized that over time many of Delcy Rodríguez's economic judgment has been sound, and he has chosen to work with her. So ordinary citizens who prefer democracy rather than central planning are understandably wary of comunas, and perhaps we will reach a system similar to China where some areas will be developed in a fully capitalist fashion and other areas will be centrally managed through the comunas arrangement, as long as those comunas really become productive. A recent activity claims that Venezuela has become more self-sufficient. However, many statistics provided by Delcy Rodríguez tend to be overconfident, as Venezuela probably does not produce 1,200,000 barrels a day. In fact, it has been reported that January petroleum production worldwide, as expressed by OPEC authorities, has actually declined in comparison to September, mostly because of restrictions of exports from Venezuela into discount markets such as China and India. First quarter of 2026 is still on its way. We have February and March to go, and along with January, this is a lagging quarter. During many weeks, we have already expressed expected improvements. We are sowing seeds of economic development and peaceful conviviality among Venezuelans, and we must now wait a long lag of 1 or 2 quarters of stabilization at the bottom of economic prosperity, and only time will provoke a recovery phase. Third phase of transition to democracy is expected by Lula and might actually accelerate if Delcy Rodríguez pushes too hard on her Comuna's stance, and text of laws is not readily available. There are issues of transparency that have not been confronted. Delcy and Jorge Rodríguez are promising a number of transparency and efficiency goals, none of which have been adequately explained in writing. And of course, text of new laws is unknown. We should be wary of press releases and propaganda items and concentrate in actually reading the exact terms proposed on any legislation that will be passed through the National Assembly. Resumption of international flights is expected progressively between the end of February and April. Bolivar continues declining at its official exchange rate, which is now 375 bolivars per $1, while the market rate is around 530 bolivars per dollar. It is a significant discrepancy between both exchange rates, and we must remember that Raul Gorrín has been arrested precisely for arbitraging recurrently on both kinds of exchange rates during the Chavez era, because that's how he made his fortune. Economic policy should emphasize convergence of both exchange rates. Convergence of exchange rates in Venezuela is perhaps the single most important economic policy imaginable, as stabilization of exchange rate would facilitate combating inflation in local currency as a single issue rather than as a consequence of constant devaluations. All economic policies are contingent to whatever changes occur in the United States due to transition on the presidency of the Federal Reserve, which hopefully will remain hawkish, as real interest rates should always be greater than inflation, while supporters of free money prefer low interest rates so that money has no cost. Hopefully, once Venezuela starts producing more millions of barrels of oil daily, it will not be necessary to continue playing with economic policy, as our prosperity will be supported by real energetic trade.